You can't fix what you don't acknowledge, and you certainly cannot change what you refuse to own. Over the decades I have sat in this chair, I have seen every variation of denial you can imagine, but there is a specific flavor of delusion that comes attached to money. Money is never just about currency. It's about power, it's about control, and for a lot of people, it is the only way they know how to define their worth as a human being. When that money disappears, you would think the person would wake up, look in the mirror, and ask, "What did I do wrong?" But that is not what happens with the type of personality I was dealing with in this case. Instead of looking in the mirror, they look out the window. They look for a villain. They look for a conspiracy. They will rewrite the entire history of their life to avoid the simple, excruciating truth that they were the architect of their own destruction. When my producers first brought the file on Mark to my dressing room, I remember tossing it onto the table and thinking that this was going to be a long day. Mark was 42 years old, a man who had once been sitting on top of a net worth that hovered around $5 million. He had the house on the hill, the exotic cars, the beautiful wife, and the reputation of a local business tycoon. Today, Mark is sleeping on a pull-out couch in his younger brother's basement, driving a car he borrowed from his mother, and he is legally bankrupt. Now, people fall on hard times, the economy shifts, businesses fail, tragedy strikes. If Mark had come to me saying, "Dr. Phil, I lost my way and I need a roadmap to get back," I would have had nothing but compassion for him. We love a comeback story, but that isn't what Mark said. Mark's application to the show didn't ask for help. It asked for vindication. He wrote in all capital letters that he was the victim of a systematic dismantling of his life by jealous ex-partners, a vindictive ex-wife, a corrupt banking system, and a family that didn't appreciate his genius. He wasn't here to learn, he was here to hold court. He wanted me to be the judge and jury that convicted everyone else so he could walk away feeling righteous about his ruin. I looked at the pre-interview tapes and I saw a man who was drowning but refusing to grab the life preserver because he was too busy screaming at the water. I walked out onto the stage that day knowing exactly what I was walking into. The energy in the room shifts when a narcissist walks in. They suck the air out of the studio. Mark walked out not like a man who had lost everything, but like a CEO arriving for a board meeting where he intended to fire everyone. He was wearing a suit that I suspect cost more than the average person's mortgage payment, a relic from his former life that he had clung to. He sat down, adjusted his cuffs, and looked at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a smile that said, "I know who you are, but let me tell you who I am." I started where I always start, with the reality of the situation. I looked him dead in the eye and asked him simply, "Mark, why are you here?" His answer was rehearsed. I could tell he had said it to himself in the mirror 1,000 times. He told me he was here to clear his name. He started listing the grievances immediately. He talked about a business partner who he claimed embezzled funds, although the forensic accounting showed simply that the business had been mismanaged into the ground. He talked about his ex-wife, Lisa, claiming she had bled him dry in the divorce, despite the court records showing she barely got enough to cover child support because there were no liquid assets left to split. He talked about the economy, the government, the interest rates. He had a Rolodex of excuses, and he was flipping through them at lightning speed. But I wasn't listening to the excuses, I was listening to the pronouns. It was they, she, it, them. Never I, never me. This is what we call an external locus of control. In Mark's mind, he was a leaf blowing in the wind, completely at the mercy of external forces, yet simultaneously, he believed he was the smartest man in the room. It is a paradox you see often in these cases. The victim, who also has a God complex, I turned my attention to the audience, then back to him, and said, "Mark, You're living in your brother David's basement. You are 42 years old. You have $0 in your checking account. You are 6 figures in debt to the IRS. How does a man who claims to be a financial genius end up unable to buy a cheeseburger without asking his mother for $5? That stung him. I saw the flash of anger in his eyes, the micro expression of rage that he quickly covered with a condescending laugh. He told me that I didn't understand high finance. He told me that assets were illiquid, that he was in a restructuring phase. He used all these buzzwords to sanitize the fact that he was broke. He was trying to intellectualize his way out of an emotional problem. He wanted to debate economics with me. I wasn't there to debate economics. I was there to talk about behavior. I brought his brother David out onto the stage. Now, David was the complete opposite. He looked tired. He looked worn down. David was a school teacher, a man who lived a modest life, paid his bills on time, and played by the rules. And for the last year, he had been housing the hurricane that was his older brother. You could see the dynamic immediately. Mark was the golden child who had fallen. David was the reliable spare who was now expected to pick up the pieces. I asked David, what is it like living with him? David hesitated. He looked at Mark, and I saw fear. Not physical fear, but the fear of upsetting the fragile equilibrium of the family. Mark stared back at him, a silent warning in his eyes. David took a breath and said, It's a lot. He tries to run the house. He tells me how to organize my kitchen. He criticizes how I raise my kids. He acts like he's doing me a favor by being there. He acts like he's doing you a favor. I repeated, letting that hang in the air. You are feeding him, you are housing him, and he's criticizing the menu? Mark interrupted then. He couldn't help himself. He told me that David lacked ambition, that he was just trying to optimize David's life, that he was trying to teach David how to think bigger. He honestly believed that his presence was a gift, that his bankruptcy was just a temporary glitch in his inevitable rise to power, and that David should be taking notes. This is the central problem we were facing. We weren't just dealing with financial illiteracy. Mark knew how math worked. He knew how to make money. He had done it before. The problem was that he used money as a drug to numb his insecurities, and when the drug ran out, he started stealing the peace of mind of everyone around him to keep the high going. He was a vampire of emotional energy. He had drained his wife, he had drained his accounts, and now he was draining his brother. I knew that if I tried to attack his logic, he would just spin more circles. He was smart enough to twist words. I had to go deeper. I had to find the source of this entitlement. You don't develop an ego this size overnight. It takes years of cultivation. It takes a family system that feeds it. It takes a lifetime of never being told no. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, and looked at him with that level of scrutiny that usually makes people squirm. Mark, I said, my voice dropping to that serious lower register. You sit here in a $2,000 suit while your brother pays for the dry cleaning. You talk about millions while you borrow gas money. The math doesn't work, but the psychology does. You are protecting something. You are building a fortress of blame to protect something very small and very frightened inside of you. And today, we are going to tear that fortress down brick by brick until we see what's really hiding in there. He crossed his arms, leaning back, physically distancing himself from me. I have nothing to hide, Phil, he said, omitting the doctor intentionally. I'm an open book. We'll see, I said. Because I've got the rest of the chapters here, and they tell a very different story than the one you're selling. To understand the fruit, you have to look at the root. You don't get a 42-year-old man who believes he is the center of the universe without a solar system that has been orbiting around him for decades. I needed to see where this programming was installed, so I called out the woman who wrote the code, his mother, Barbara. Barbara walked onto the stage, and the family dynamic revealed itself in less than 10 seconds. She walked right past David, her son, who was currently housing, feeding, and supporting her other son, and went straight to Mark. She patted Mark on the shoulder, adjusted his collar, and gave him a look of pure adoration before she even acknowledged my existence. It was as if David was invisible, a piece of furniture in the room, while Mark was the prize pony who had just stumbled in the race. She sat down, smoothed her skirt, and looked at me with a defensive glare. Before I could even ask a question, she launched into her opening statement. "Doctor, Phil, you have to understand," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of nerves and indignation. "Mark has always been special. He has a brilliant mind. What happened to him was a tragedy. He was targeted because people are jealous of his success." "Barbara," I interrupted, keeping my voice soft but firm. "He is living in a basement. He is bankrupt. That is not a tragedy caused by jealous neighbors. That is a result of choices. And I need to know, when he was growing up, did he ever hear the word no?" She blinked, confused by the question. "Well, of course. But Mark didn't need to be told no very often. He was always right. Even his teachers said he was advanced." I looked over at David. He was staring at the floor, a look of resignation on his face that broke my heart. "David," I said, "what happens when you tell Mark no?" David looked up, glancing nervously at his mother. "Mom gets upset," he said quietly. "She says I'm not being supportive. She says I'm jealous." "Jealous," I repeated. "You're paying his electric bill. What exactly are you jealous of?" This is what we call the golden child syndrome. Growing up, Mark wasn't just loved, he was worshiped. He was the quarterback, the valedictorian, the one who could do no wrong. If he got a bad grade, the teacher was incompetent. If he got in trouble, the other kids were bad influences. Barbara had spent 40 years sweeping the path in front of him, so he never had to stumble over a single pebble. The result? He never learned how to walk on rough terrain. He never developed resilience. He learned that if something goes wrong, it is inherently, automatically someone else's fault. I turned back to Barbara. "You are loving this boy to death," I told her. "You have crippled him. You have taught him that he is above the rules. And now that the real world has hit him with a reality check that he can't charm his way out of, he is collapsing. And instead of helping him stand up, you are handing him a pillow so he can stay comfortable on the ground." Mark scoffed at this. "My mother supports me because she believes in my vision. She knows that this is temporary. I have deals in the pipeline, Phil, big deals." "Mark, you don't have a pipeline," I said bluntly. "You have a pipe dream." I needed to escalate this. We had established the origin story, the mother who couldn't see the truth and the brother who was too afraid to speak it. Now, I needed to bring in the person who had been in the trenches with him when the bomb finally went off. I needed the truth teller. I called out his ex-wife, Lisa. Lisa was a striking woman, but she looked exhausted. She walked out with a rigidity in her posture that told me she had been holding herself together by sheer willpower for a very long time. She didn't look at Mark. She sat down as far away from him as the seating arrangement allowed. Mark rolled his eyes when she sat down. "Here we go," he muttered. "The revisionist historian." "Lisa," I said, "Mark says you bled him dry. He says the divorce is the reason he is in this financial hole. What is your version of events?" Lisa took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was steady, cutting through the studio like a laser. "Dr. Phil, when we got married, I thought he was ambitious. I didn't realize he was delusional. The bleeding dry he talks about, that was me trying to pay the mortgage while he was leasing luxury cars we couldn't afford to impress clients he didn't have. She reached under her chair and pulled out a manila folder. Mark stiffened. Narcissists hate documentation. They thrive in the gray areas of memory where they can twist the narrative. They cannot handle black and white paper trails. He says the business failed because of his partner Lisa continued opening the folder. The business failed because Mark took $200,000 of operating capital and spent it on a networking trip to Monaco. He spent it on private jets and five-star hotels to court investors who never existed. That was marketing, Mark shouted, pointing a finger at her. You have to spend money to make money. You have a scarcity mindset, Lisa. That's why we never worked. You think small. I think about feeding our children. Lisa snapped back, her composure cracking for just a second. She turned to me, eyes pleading. Dr. Phil, he emptied the kids' college funds. He forged my signature on a second mortgage. I didn't leave him because I wanted his money. I left him because I woke up one day and realized I was married to a con artist who believed his own con. The audience gasped. The forging of a signature, the theft of a child's future, these are the things that strip away the veneer of the misunderstood genius and reveal the predator underneath. I looked at Mark. He wasn't looking at the audience. He was looking at his cuffs, picking at a loose thread. He wasn't showing remorse. He was showing annoyance. He was annoyed that she had brought up the college fund. In his mind, that money was his to use because he was going to put it back tenfold once his ship came in. That is the lie they always tell themselves. They aren't stealing, they are leveraging. Mark, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Did you take the money from your children's education fund? It was a loan, he said quickly. I intend to pay it back with interest. They're only 10 and 12. They don't need it yet. You stole from your children, I corrected him. You stole their security to buy your ego a few more months of life support. You prioritized your image over their future. That is not a business decision. That is a moral failing. He looked at me, his jaw tight. You don't understand the pressure I was under. I had people expecting things from me. I had a reputation. You had a reputation you couldn't afford, I said, and to keep it, you burned down your family. And now, here you are, sitting next to your mother who tells you you're a victim, and your brother who is afraid to tell you to get a job while your ex-wife is holding the receipts of your betrayal. This isn't a conspiracy, Mark. This is a crime scene, and you are the one holding the smoking gun. The escalation was palpable. We had moved past the poor me narrative. We were now in the thick of the deception. The walls of his fortress were taking hits, but he was still standing behind them, firing back. He still believed he could outtalk the evidence. He still believed that if he just explained it using enough big words, we would all see that he was actually the hero of this story. But I wasn't done. I had to show him the collateral damage in a way he couldn't ignore. I had to make him look at the wreckage not as a line item on a balance sheet, but as human beings he had crushed. David, I turned back to the brother. I want to go back to you for a second. You heard what Lisa just said about the college fund. You heard about the forgery. Does your brother have access to your financial information? David went pale. He looked at Mark, then at me, and the silence that followed was louder than any scream. David, I pressed. I noticed my credit card was missing last week, David whispered. Mark exploded. Oh, come on. I borrowed it to buy groceries. I was going to put it back in your wallet before you even noticed. I was doing the shopping for the house. You stole his credit card, I said, leaning in. You are doing the same thing to your brother that you did to your wife. You are a parasite, Mark. You attach yourself to a host, you drain them until they are dry, and then you blame them for not having enough blood. Mark stood up. He actually stood up and made a move like he was going to walk off the stage. "I don't have to listen to this," he said. "I came here for help, not to be insulted." "Sit down," I barked. It wasn't a request, it was a command. "You came here for validation. You aren't getting it. What you are getting is the truth. And you are going to sit there and listen to it because for the first time in your life, you have nowhere else to go. You burned the bridge with your wife, you are burning the bridge with your brother. And if you walk out that door, you are walking out into a world that knows exactly who you are now." He hesitated, he looked at the exit, then he looked at the camera, and finally he sank back into his chair. He was trapped, not by me, but by his own reality. The air in the studio was electric. You could feel the tension vibrating off the walls. Mark was back in his chair, but he wasn't submitting, he was regrouping. I could see the wheels turning in his head, calculating his next move, trying to find an angle, a loophole, a way to spin this disaster back in his favor. This is the danger zone with a personality like his. When cornered, they don't just defend, they attack. "You're painting a caricature, Phil," Mark said, his voice regaining some of that slick boardroom confidence. "You're taking isolated incidents and weaving them into a character assassination." I made mistakes. I admitted that. But to call me a parasite? That's unprofessional. I built a company from scratch. I employed 50 people. I created value. You created debt. I corrected him. And you left 50 people unemployed when the house of cards collapsed because you were skimming off the top to fund a lifestyle your revenue couldn't support. We spoke to some of your former employees, Mark. I signaled to the control room. The large screen behind us flickered to life. A video package started playing. It wasn't just numbers and spreadsheets, it was faces, real people. A young woman crying because her final paycheck bounced and she couldn't pay rent. An older man who had lost his retirement savings because he invested in Mark's company based on insider promises. Mark watched the screen. His expression, unreadable. He wasn't flinching, he wasn't crying, he was just watching, like he was watching a documentary about someone else. When the video ended, the audience was silent. A heavy, judgmental silence. "Do you feel anything when you see that?" I asked him. "Do you feel any responsibility for the pain on those faces?" Mark sighed, a long, weary exhalation that sounded more like boredom than regret. "Of course I feel bad, Phil. It's unfortunate. But business is risk." They knew that. They signed the contracts. If the market hadn't turned, they would all be rich right now. I swung for the fences. Sometimes you strike out. "You didn't strike out," I said, my voice rising. "You cheated. You took money that wasn't yours to gamble with. And now you're sitting here telling me it's unfortunate? That is a clinical lack of empathy, Mark." I turned to Barbara. She was wringing her hands, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears for the victims on the screen. "Barbara, you're crying," I said. "Tell me what you're feeling right now." "It's just so unfair," she sobbed. "Everyone is against him. He has such a good heart. He would give you the shirt off his back." "He doesn't own a shirt to give," I exclaimed, frustration finally bleeding into my tone. "The shirt on his back was bought with stolen money. Barbara, you are enabling a monster. You are the gas station where he fills up his tank of delusion. Every time you tell him it's not his fault, you are handing him a match to burn someone else." I saw David shift in his seat. He looked at his mother, then at the screen where the victims' faces were frozen. Something was happening in David. The dam was breaking. "Mom," David said, his voice trembling, "he stole my credit card." Barbara waved a hand at him dismissively. "Oh, David, stop it. He said he was going to pay you back. He's your brother. You help family. No, David said, louder this time, he stood up. It was the first time he had taken a physical stand. No, I'm done. I'm done helping family if helping family means being robbed. He turned to Mark. You're not staying in my house anymore. Not tonight, not tomorrow. Mark looked at David with genuine shock. He had never seen the spare stand up to him. David, don't be dramatic. This is TV. You're playing to the cameras. I'm not playing, David shouted, tears finally spilling over. I'm protecting my kids. You criticize how I raise them? At least I'm not stealing their future. You're out, Mark. You are out. The audience erupted in applause. It was a primal reaction. They were witnessing a man reclaiming his spine. Mark looked around, realizing he was losing his last safe harbor. He turned to his mother. Mom, tell him he's being ridiculous. Barbara looked at David, then at Mark. She was torn. The programming was deep, but the reality of her good son finally breaking was a shock to her system. She didn't speak. She just cried harder. This is the confrontation you needed, I told Mark. Not with me, with reality. Your brother just evicted you. Your ex-wife despises you. Your mother is paralyzed by your mess. You have stripped the gears of every relationship you have. So, here is the million-dollar question, Mark. And since you like money, you should pay attention. What are you going to do? He looked at me, his arrogance finally showing cracks. The smirk was gone. The confidence was shaking. I don't know, he stammered. I need a place to stay. I need to make some calls. No more calls, I said. No more deals. No more schemes. You need to stop moving. You need to stop talking. You need to start listening. I leaned in close. You have a disorder, Mark. It's not just greed. It's a personality disorder that makes you incapable of seeing your own flaws. You view people as objects to be used. And until you fix that wiring in your brain, you will continue to leave a trail of destruction. I can help you, but the help isn't a check. It isn't a job offer. It's treatment, intensive, inpatient treatment where you are going to be stripped of your suit, stripped of your ego, and forced to look at who you really are. Mark looked at me with disdain. Rehab? I'm not a drug addict, Phil. You are addicted to yourself, I said. And it is the most destructive addiction I have seen in a long time. I have arranged for a place for you, a dual diagnosis center that specializes in personality disorders and behavioral modification. They are ready to take you today, right now. A car is waiting. Mark laughed a dry, bitter sound. You think I'm going to lock myself away with a bunch of crazy people? I have a business to rebuild. You have no business. I slammed my hand on the armrest. You have nothing. You are homeless. You are penniless. And as of 5 minutes ago, you are familyless. You are standing on the edge of a cliff and you are arguing about gravity. Take the help, Mark. It is the only offer on the table. He looked at the audience. He looked at Lisa, who was staring at him with cold indifference. He looked at David, who was still standing, chest heaving, refusing to make eye contact. And finally, he looked at his mother. Mom? He asked, his voice small. Barbara looked up. She wiped her eyes. And for the first time, she didn't rush to save him. I can't take you in, Mark, she whispered. I live in a senior complex. I can't have you there. The silence that followed was absolute. The safety net was gone. The enabler had finally, feebly closed the door. Mark sat there, isolated in the center of the stage. The realization was washing over him. He wasn't the tycoon anymore. He wasn't the victim. He was just a man alone in a room full of people who saw right through him. He started, then stopped. He looked at the floor. I don't belong in a place like that. That is exactly where you belong, I said softly, because it's the only place where you can learn to belong in the real world again. It's not a punishment, Mark. It's a rescue mission. But you have to climb the ladder yourself. He was fighting it. I could see the battle in his eyes. The ego was screaming at him to walk out, to storm off, to find another victim, to con. But the reality of having nowhere to sleep that night was a powerful counter-argument. What if I don't go? He asked. Then you walk out that door and you figure it out, I said. But David isn't taking you back. Lisa isn't taking you back. Barbara isn't taking you back. You are on your own, completely. He looked at the car keys on the table, the ones he had borrowed from his mother. Give her the keys, Mark, I said. He froze. Give her the keys. Slowly, painfully, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the key fob. He placed it on the table. It was a symbolic surrender. He was relinquishing the last vestige of his unearned mobility. Okay, he whispered. Okay. It wasn't a breakthrough of the soul. It was a breakthrough of necessity. But sometimes that is where it starts. You have to hit the bottom before you can push off. I turned to the audience. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk to David and Lisa about how to heal from the trauma of loving a narcissist. Because the wreckage doesn't disappear just because the wrecking ball has been moved. As the cameras cut, the producers moved in. Mark was escorted off the stage, not like a criminal, but like a patient. He looked smaller without his arrogance to inflate him. David sat back down, putting his head in his hands, and Lisa reached over to touch his arm. A small gesture of solidarity between the survivors, that was the confrontation. We stripped him naked in front of the world, not to shame him, but to show him that the emperor had no clothes. It was brutal, it was necessary, but the question remained, would it stick? Narcissism is a stubborn stain. It doesn't wash out with one cycle. There is a stillness that settles over a studio after a confrontation like that. The adrenaline fades, and what you're left with is the heavy, suffocating weight of reality. Mark had been escorted off stage, stripped of his car keys, his brother's credit card, and the last shred of his denial. But removing the narcissist is only half the battle. The other half is cleaning up the mess he left behind. The emotional debris field was vast. I turned my chair toward David and Lisa. They were sitting close now, united by a shared trauma they had probably never fully articulated to each other until this moment. David looked shell-shocked. He had just evicted his brother on national television. That is not something a person does lightly. It goes against every instinct of family loyalty, every lesson his mother had drilled into him since childhood. David, I said gently, take a breath. You just did something incredibly difficult. How are you feeling right now? David looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. I feel guilty, he admitted, his voice cracking. I feel like I just kicked a drowning man back into the water. You didn't kick him back in, I corrected him. You stopped letting him pull you under. There is a difference between drowning and refusing to swim. Mark knows how to swim, he just prefers to ride on your back. You saved yourself, and more importantly, you saved your children. Do you understand that? David nodded slowly, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He looked over at his mother, Barbara, who was sitting with her head bowed, weeping silently into a tissue. Barbara, I said, my voice firm but not unkind. Look at your son. Look at David. She lifted her head, her face a mask of misery. He's going to hate me, she whispered. Mark is going to hate me for not taking him in. He might, I said bluntly, but if you had taken him in, he would have destroyed you too. You are living on a fixed income in a senior community. You cannot afford to support a 42-year-old man who believes he is too good for an entry-level job. You would have been his next victim, Barbara, and you know it. She flinched at the word victim, but she didn't argue. Deep down, she knew I was right. She had been protecting Mark from the consequences of his actions for so long that she had forgotten what healthy love looked like. She thought love meant never saying no. She thought love meant shielding him from pain. But that isn't love. That is dependency. Lisa, I turned to the ex-wife. You've been nodding this whole time. You know exactly what David is feeling, don't you? Every day, Lisa said, her voice stronger now, every day for 10 years, the guilt, the feeling that if I just tried harder, if I just gave him one more chance, he would change. But he never did. He just got better at manipulating me. He used my hope against me. He used your hope against you, I repeated. That is a powerful statement. Narcissists are experts at weaponizing your best qualities, your empathy, your loyalty, your optimism. They see those things not as virtues, but as vulnerabilities to be exploited. And when you finally draw a line, they act like you are the one who is betraying them. I looked back at David. David, you need to hear this. Mark is going to call you. He is going to beg. He is going to threaten. He is going to tell you that you are ruining his life. And when he does, you need to remember this moment. You need to remember the feeling of your credit card missing from your wallet. You need to remember the look on your wife's face when she realized he was stealing from your family. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep him warm. David took a deep breath and sat up straighter. I know, he said. I know. It's just hard. He's my big brother. I always looked up to him. You looked up to a mirage, I said. You looked up to the image he projected, not the man he actually was. And that is a painful loss to grieve. You are grieving the brother you thought you had, not the one who actually exists. We spent the rest of the segment unpacking the family dynamics. We talked about boundaries. We talked about the difference helping and enabling. We talked about how to rebuild trust after financial infidelity. It was heavy lifting, but it was necessary. You can't just amputate the toxic limb. You have to treat the infection in the rest of the body. When the show ended, the audience filed out in a subdued silence. They had seen something raw. They had seen a family shatter and then tentatively begin to pick up the pieces. Backstage, the mood was somber. Mark was gone, whisked away to the treatment center I had arranged. It was a dual diagnosis facility, one that specialized in personality disorders and addiction. It wasn't a spa. It was a place where he would be challenged every single day. He would have group therapy, individual counseling, financial literacy classes, and strict accountability. No suits, no cell phones. No access to the outside world to spin his narrative. I went to my dressing room and sat down for a moment, staring at the empty chair opposite me. I thought about Mark. I thought about the thousands of Marks I had met over the years. The ones who believe the world owes them a living. The ones who mistake confidence for competence. The ones who leave a trail of destruction in their wake and call it bad luck. Would he change? That is always the question. Can a narcissist really change? The clinical answer is it's extremely difficult. The personality structure is rigid. The defense mechanisms are entrenched. To change, they have to be willing to shatter their own ego, to admit that their entire self-concept is a lie. That is a terrifying prospect for anyone, let alone someone whose entire existence is built on being special. But I have seen miracles happen. I have seen people hit rock bottom and find a trap door to a basement they didn't know existed, and in that darkness, find a spark of humility. It's rare, but it happens. 6 months later, we did a follow-up show. The producers had kept tabs on Mark. He had stayed in the facility for 90 days. That alone was a surprise. I half expected him to walk out after the first week. But he stayed. Whether it was out of genuine desire to change or simply because he had literally nowhere else to go, I couldn't say for sure, but he stayed. When Mark walked out onto the stage for the follow-up, the difference was immediate. He wasn't wearing the $2,000 suit. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt and slacks. He looked ordinary. And for a man like Mark, looking ordinary was a radical transformation. He sat down, and he didn't lean back with that arrogant swagger. He sat forward, hands clasped on his knees. He looked nervous. "Welcome back, Mark," I said. "Thank you, Dr. Phil," he replied. His voice was quieter, less boom, more resonance. "So," I said, 90 days. How was it?" He let out a short, self-deprecating laugh. "Hell," he said, "it was hell. They didn't let me get away with anything. Every time I tried to blame someone, they stopped the session. Every time I tried to brag, they asked me to look at the facts. It was exhausting." "And what did you learn?" I asked. He looked at the audience, then back at me. "I learned that I'm not special," he said. "I learned that I'm just a guy who made a lot of bad choices because he was afraid of being ordinary. I learned that money isn't a scorecard. It's just a tool. And I learned that I broke a lot of people who loved me." I watched him closely. Was he performing? Was this the repentant sinner act? Just another role to play to get back in our good graces? It's possible. Narcissists are excellent actors, but there was something in his eyes that looked different. A sadness, a heaviness that hadn't been there before. "And where are you living now?" I asked. "I'm in a sober living house," he said. "I have a job, not a career, a job." "Doing what?" "I'm working at a car rental agency," he said. "Checking cars in, washing them. It pays $15 an hour." The audience murmured, "From CEO to car washer." It was a steep fall. "And how does that feel?" I asked. "Humbling," he said. "Honestly, it feels safe. I punch a clock, I do the work, I go home, I don't have to pretend to be a genius. I don't have to lie to anyone about my portfolio. I just wash the cars." "And your family?" I pressed. He looked down at his hands. "David hasn't spoken to me yet. I sent him a letter apologizing for the credit card for everything he hasn't replied. And I understand that. I have to earn that back. It might take years. It might never happen. But I have to accept that." "And Lisa?" "Lisa is civil," he said. "She let me see the kids last weekend for an hour, supervised. It was hard. They looked at me differently. They weren't looking at Dad the hero. They were looking at a guy who let them down. That hurt more than the bankruptcy." I leaned forward. "Mark, you are describing consequences. For the first time in your life, you are actually feeling the consequences of your actions instead of running from them. And that is progress. That is real progress." We brought out Barbara. She looked different too, less frantic. She gave Mark a hug, but it was tentative. She didn't fawn over him. She sat down next to him, but she didn't hold his hand. "Barbara, how are you doing?" I asked. "I'm doing okay," she said. "I'm going to a support group for families of people with challenges. It helps. I'm learning to let go." "And are you helping him financially?" "No," she said firmly. He asked for money for a deposit on an apartment last week. I told him no. I told him he had to save up from his job. Good for you, I said. And Mark, how did you handle that? No? Mark smiled a little. I was angry for about 10 minutes, he admitted. Old habits die hard. But then I realized she was right. If she gave it to me, I wouldn't appreciate it. I have to earn it. This was the outcome. It wasn't a fairy tale. He wasn't suddenly a millionaire again. He wasn't fully reconciled with his brother. He was working a minimum wage job, living in a halfway house, and trying to rebuild his life one brick at a time. It was messy, it was unglamorous, but it was real. Reality is rarely wrapped in a bow. It's gritty, it's slow, and it's often boring. That's the part the movies skip. They show the intervention, the tears, the hug, and then cut to 1 year later where everyone is smiling at a barbecue. But life isn't a movie. Life is Tuesday morning when you have to get up and go to a job you're overqualified for because you blew up your career. Life is sitting alone in a small room realizing that your brother hasn't called you back in 6 months. Life is the quiet, grinding work of redemption. Mark's journey wasn't over just because the cameras turned off. In fact, that's when the real test began. The show provides a container, a pressure cooker that forces change, but once you step out of that studio, the world is waiting to test your resolve. I kept in touch with Mark's counselors. I wanted to know if the new Mark was just a skin he was wearing to survive the scrutiny. The reports were mixed, as they often are. There were days he relapsed into his old arrogance, trying to tell the manager at the car rental agency how to run the business. There were days he complained that the world didn't understand his genius, but there were also days where he just put his head down and worked, and those were the days that mattered. About a year after our first meeting, I received a letter from David. It was handwritten, which always carries more weight. He wrote to tell me that he had finally met Mark for coffee. It was a short meeting, only 30 minutes. Mark had tried to pitch him a small investment opportunity, a reflex, a phantom limb itch he couldn't quite scratch, but this time David didn't cower. He didn't look at his shoes. He simply said, "Mark, if you talk about money, I'm leaving." And Mark stopped. He actually stopped. They spent the rest of the time talking about baseball, about the weather, about safe, neutral topics. It wasn't a deep, soul-bearing reconciliation, but it was a start. It was a boundary held and respected. Lisa, on the other hand, was less forgiving, and rightly so. She had moved on. She had remarried a man who was stable, boring in the best way possible, and kind. Mark had to watch from the sidelines as another man raised his children, took them to soccer practice, and provided the security he had gambled away. That is a specific kind of hell for a narcissist to be replaced and to be irrelevant, but it was also his greatest lesson. He had to learn that he wasn't indispensable. He had to learn that the world kept spinning without him at the center. I often think about Mark when I see other guests walk onto my stage with that same glint in their eye, that mix of desperation and delusion. They want the magic pill. They want me to wave a wand and make the debt disappear, make the spouse return, make the shame go away. But I can't do that. No one can. The only way out is through. Mark's story isn't a triumph in the traditional sense. He didn't win the lottery. He didn't start a new Fortune 500 company. He is currently a shift supervisor at that car rental agency. He lives in a one-bedroom apartment that he pays for himself. He drives a 10-year-old sedan. By his old standards, he is a failure. But by the standards of reality, he is finally a success. He is self-sufficient. He is honest. He is present. The last time I spoke to him, briefly on the phone, I asked him if he was happy. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Happy is a big word, Phil, he said. I'm not thrilled. I miss the jets. I miss the rush. I'm not going to lie to you, but I sleep at night. I don't wake up in a panic wondering which lie I have to remember. I don't have to look over my shoulder. There's a peace in that. A boring, quiet peace. That's not boring, Mark, I told him. That's freedom. And that is the truth of it. We spend so much time chasing the high, the status, the approval, the validation, that we become prisoners of our own image. We build these elaborate cages of gold and glass, and we starve inside them. True freedom isn't having everything you want. It's realizing you don't need to be special to be worthy. It's realizing that being an ordinary, decent human being who pays his bills and tells the truth is enough. Mark's case was a reminder that you can't save everyone from themselves, but you can force them to look in the mirror. You can strip away the excuses until all that's left is the person, and sometimes, just sometimes, the person who looks back is ready to start over. It's a long road, it's a steep climb, but as I always say, the only time you should ever look down on someone is when you are helping them up. Mark is still climbing. He slips, he stumbles, but he hasn't let go of the ladder. And in the end, that is all we can ask of anyone